The room is silent. Not a whisper, not a shuffle, just the steady ticking of a clock that has counted down decades of waiting. On one side, an inmate whose mind has been rehearsing this moment for years. On the other, the officers, trained and hardened, yet human, feeling the weight of a procedure that leaves no room for mistakes. This is America's lethal injection, but not as you've seen it before. Behind the sterile protocols and legal reports lies a hidden battlefield of psychology, tension, and human contradiction. In this, you'll witness what official records, prison psychologists, and real inmate testimonies reveal about the mental and emotional experience of execution, safely and factually, without ever showing what happens to the body. Are humans really prepared for this? Can the mind endure the final hours? And how do the officers reconcile their role in this ultimate act of the state? This documentary contains descriptions of prison conditions and violence for educational purposes based on verified sources. Viewer discretion is advised. For more deep research of prison documentary like this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Every year, dozens of inmates across the United States approach a moment that will define their existence: the lethal injection. The procedure itself is highly regulated, studied, and standardized, but what isn't often discussed is the psychological architecture surrounding the execution. Researchers from the American Psychological Association, the National Institute of Justice, and Prison Behavioral Studies by Craig Haney and Irwin reveal patterns in inmate thought processes, coping mechanisms, and behavioral shifts in the days, hours, and minutes leading up to execution. Meanwhile, officers, guards, and medical staff experience emotional contradictions, cognitive dissonance, and long-term stress responses, as documented in CDCR and Chicago Crime Lab studies. These are the human realities behind the headlines, rarely explored in public discussions about capital punishment. This documentary doesn't show the execution itself. It shows the mindset, the psychology, and the invisible tension surrounding it. The part that shapes lives on both sides of the chamber. The countdown of the mind. Imagine spending years in a small, controlled environment knowing that a specific date marks the end of your life. The mental preparation begins long before the official notice of execution. Inmates often experience anticipatory anxiety. Even months before the date, thoughts of mortality sharpen, decision-making narrows, and the mind cycles repeatedly over past choices, regrets, and what-ifs. Haney, Psychology and the Legal System, 2003. Mental rehearsals. Inmates create detailed mental scripts of what will happen in their final hours. This is a coping mechanism, giving a sense of control in a situation where there is none. Shifts in social behavior. Interactions with fellow inmates, family, and staff change dramatically. Some become withdrawn, others hyper-engaged, attempting to assert agency in the final stage of life. Cognitive compartmentalization. Many inmates report separating day-to-day prison life from the looming execution, creating mental zones to protect themselves from constant anxiety. Psychologists like Haney and Irwin describe this as a state of hyper-reflective consciousness. Every choice, every memory, every relationship is evaluated in terms of meaning, significance, and consequence. Yet, these processes are invisible to the public eye. Guards and staff see routines, paperwork, and procedures, but what is happening inside the mind of a death row inmate is often a silent, intense psychological storm. Some officers describe watching these inmates in the final days as watching someone move through a different reality, one where time, fear, and acceptance coexist in a delicate balance. The tension is palpable, and the outcomes unpredictable, not in physical behavior, but in psychological responses. At this point, the countdown is no longer just on paper. It is ingrained in the mind, shaping every interaction, every thought, every heartbeat. The officer's paradox. While the inmate prepares mentally for a life-ending event, the officers tasked with carrying out the procedure face their own invisible battle, a psychological paradox rarely discussed outside correctional psychology studies. According to research by the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, CDCR, and studies by Craig Haney and Irwin, officers involved in executions experience a unique blend of professional detachment and moral tension. On one hand, they must follow strict legal protocols. On the other, they are human beings witnessing the ultimate finality of life. Key psychological patterns among execution officers include cognitive dissonance. Officers often reconcile their role by reframing the act as a procedure rather than a human event. This allows them to maintain functionality, but the tension lingers subconsciously. Emotional compartmentalization. Many report switching off emotionally before and during the procedure, only to process feelings days or even weeks later, leading to stress, sleep disturbances, and intrusive thoughts. Post-event reflection. Even with years of experience, officers describe moments of unexpected empathy or questioning, moments that cannot be trained away. Some describe the lingering thought, "I followed the law, but what does it mean for me as a person?" Social isolation. Many officers avoid discussing their experiences with friends or family, fearing judgment or misunderstanding. This isolation intensifies the internal psychological burden. Interestingly, research from the National Institute of Justice, NIJ, shows that the officers' stress responses mirror those of soldiers or emergency responders in high-stakes scenarios, yet with a uniquely morally ambiguous component. Unlike battlefield stress, which is externalized in clear threats, execution-related stress is entirely human-to-human, legal yet intimate, controlled yet emotionally charged. For officers, the paradox lies in being instruments of law while remaining morally autonomous. The preparation for execution is not just logistical, it is a mental rehearsal of how to witness life and death simultaneously without losing one's sense of self. In these final hours, the prison becomes a stage of psychological tension shared between two worlds, the inmate, confronting mortality, and the officers, confronting morality. Both sides exist in parallel, bound by the procedure but separated by experience. The result is a silent choreography of anticipation, control, and reflection, where every decision, though seemingly routine, carries deep emotional weight. And yet, the world outside sees only schedules, paperwork, and standardized protocols. By the time the execution begins, both mindsets have undergone an intense, private psychological preparation, the full extent of which will never be fully visible or understood by the public. The final hours, inmate coping mechanisms. As the date of execution draws near, the inmate's psychological world becomes intensely focused. This is a period not of physical spectacle, but of mental reckoning, shaped by decades of confinement, reflection, and anticipation. Studies from Craig Haney, Irwin, and the National Institute of Justice reveal that inmates facing imminent execution engage in complex coping strategies to manage the enormity of what is coming. Ritualized routines. Many create rigid schedules in the final hours: meditation, prayer, letter writing, or revisiting personal habits. These routines serve as anchors in an otherwise uncontrollable situation, offering a semblance of agency. Cognitive reframing. Inmates often reinterpret their fate in philosophical or spiritual terms. Some focus on acceptance, others on legacy, and some on the idea of closure for victims or family. These reframing strategies help reduce acute anxiety and provide emotional focus. Social calibration. Interaction with other inmates, staff, or family becomes highly strategic. According to research in the Chicago Crime Lab, some inmates seek calm engagement, while others withdraw entirely, conserving emotional energy for themselves. Mental rehearsals and reflection. This is not about imagining the procedure itself, but running through conversations, past decisions, and personal narratives. Inmate reflections often center on identity, morality, and unfinished life goals, illustrating profound cognitive engagement at the edge of life. Psychologist Craig Haney describes this period as a state of heightened existential awareness, where time, memory, and meaning compress. Every thought, emotion, and decision is intensified as the mind oscillates between anticipation, acceptance, and self-confrontation. Interestingly, research shows that inmates with structured coping mechanisms, whether through spiritual practices, journaling, or mentoring younger prisoners, report lower observable distress, even as the external world remains indifferent to their internal struggle. From an outside perspective, these moments may appear quiet, almost uneventful. But in reality, the inmate is navigating a psychological labyrinth, balancing fear, reflection, and a fragile sense of control. Every letter written, every word spoken, every internal dialogue represents a carefully constructed attempt to survive mentally, if not physically. In these hours, the prison becomes a space of intense inner life, unseen and unacknowledged, where the human mind pushes its limits in ways studies are only beginning to fully understand. And while the inmate navigates this internal terrain, the officers and staff, having completed their mental preparation, watch the clock, maintain protocols, and manage their own concealed stress, forming a silent, parallel psychological experience that mirrors the inmate's own. The tension is almost tangible. The final hours are not about procedure, they are about human psychology stretched to its outermost boundaries, a collision of time, mortality, and moral complexity that the public rarely witnesses. The psychological ripple, lasting impacts beyond the chamber. The execution ends, but the psychological consequences do not. Studies from the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, CDCR, Haney, Irwin, and the Chicago Crime Lab reveal that the mental impact of lethal injection extends far beyond the moment itself, shaping the lives of both officers and inmates in subtle but lasting ways. For officers and staff, delayed emotional processing. Many officers report that feelings of tension, moral conflict, or existential questioning emerge days or weeks after the event. Some experience sleep disturbances, intrusive thoughts, or subtle changes in empathy even years later. Moral residue. Participating in executions can leave a lingering sense of moral complexity, described in psychological literature as moral residue, where an action is legally correct but emotionally conflicting. Officers may struggle to reconcile professional duty with personal values. Shift in worldview. Some officers reflect on life, justice, and mortality more profoundly after repeated exposure, reshaping personal priorities, relationships, and professional identity. For inmates on death row, both those executed and those awaiting execution. Enduring mental structures. The coping strategies developed during final hours often leave lasting cognitive frameworks. Journaling, reflection, and structured thought patterns can continue to influence behavior, self-concept, and social interaction, even for those who remain incarcerated. Existential awareness. Research by Haney shows that facing imminent death heightens self-reflection and moral reasoning. Inmates often report a long-term shift in values, spiritual outlook, or interpersonal insight, a silent transformation rarely visible to the outside world. Shared psychological consequences. Both inmates and officers exist in a network of unspoken psychological tension, bound by the same system but separated by perspective. Each execution creates a ripple effect, touching families, colleagues, and fellow inmates, demonstrating that the mental impact of the death penalty is rarely confined to the moment itself. The lessons from these studies are profound. Lethal injection is not just a procedure, it is a psychological event, a human encounter with mortality, ethics, and the law. Understanding it requires looking beyond the sterile legal reports into the minds of those who live it, whether as subjects or as witnesses. The story of lethal injection is not the story of a procedure. It is the story of human psychology under extreme conditions, of minds navigating mortality, moral tension, and the search for control in a situation defined by law. From the inmate quietly preparing in their cell, to the officers silently confronting moral paradoxes, the psychological complexity is as real as it is invisible. These are the hidden truths behind a system designed to be procedural, yet profoundly human in effect. If this exploration into the psychology of lethal injection has opened your mind to the unseen complexities of justice, mortality, and human resilience, subscribe now for more deeply researched, non-repetitive, and thought-provoking documentaries. Every week, we uncover hidden psychological truths within America's prisons, justice system, and criminal minds, always factual, always insightful, and always YouTube safe.